The silence in an old Texas University library after midnight can be deafening until it's broken by something that shouldn't be there. As a custodian, I've learned that the rules of this place were abandoned long ago, leaving behind chilling occurrences that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Prepare for a late-night tour you won't forget. The Hartwell Memorial Library stands like a monument to forgotten times on the western edge of campus, its red brick facade darkened by more than a century of Texas storms and scorching summers. Built in 1898 by oil baron Theodore Hartwell as a gift to the university, the building carries the weight of its age in every creaking floorboard and shadowed corner. For stories of Gothic Revival architecture, complete with pointed arch windows and gargoyles that leer down from the roofline, it looks more like a cathedral than a place of learning. During the day, students hurry through its halls, eager to complete their research and escape to the modern comforts of the newer library across campus. But at night, the building belongs to something else entirely. My name is Daniel Reeves, and I've been the night custodian here for 3 months. The job posting had been almost too good to be true. Excellent pay, minimal supervision, and the solitude I craved after my messy divorce. I work from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, 5 nights a week, maintaining the building while the world sleeps. The university had been desperate to fill the position. In my interview, the facilities manager, an exhausted-looking woman named Gloria Martinez, had been almost apologetic about the hours and the isolation. She'd mentioned that the previous custodian had quit suddenly, offering no explanation beyond a terse 2-word resignation email. Can't stay. I should have asked more questions. My first few weeks passed without incident. The routine was simple enough. Start on the 4th floor and work my way down, emptying trash bins, mopping floors, dusting shelves, and ensuring all windows were secured. The building's age meant constant maintenance. The heating system groaned like a dying animal, pipes clanged at random intervals, and the electrical wiring was temperamental at best. I'd grown accustomed to lights flickering as I worked, the buzz of dying fluorescent tubes creating an ambient soundtrack to my solitary nights. The library's interior reflected its Gothic exterior. Dark wood paneling covered most walls, and the original gas lamp fixtures, long since converted to electricity, cast pools of amber light that never quite reached the corners. The main reading room on the 2nd floor featured a vaulted ceiling with exposed wooden beams and stained glass windows depicting scenes of classical learning. During the day, these windows transformed sunlight into jeweled patterns across the floor. At night, they became black mirrors, reflecting only darkness back at you. I developed a rhythm, a choreography of cleaning that kept me moving and, more importantly, kept my mind occupied. The silence of the place was oppressive in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not peaceful silence, but expectant silence, like the held breath before a scream. I started bringing my old MP3 player, letting classic rock fill my ears and push back against the waiting quiet. It was during my 3rd week, on a Tuesday night in late September, when I first noticed something wrong. I was on the 3rd floor, in the history section, running my dust mop along the base of the towering shelves. The aisle stretched before me, lined with volumes on Texas history, the Civil War, and regional folklore. My music was playing, some old Eagles song, when I felt it, the distinct sensation of being watched. Not the vague paranoia of working alone, but the specific, visceral awareness of eyes on your back. I turned, expecting to see nothing, ready to laugh at myself for being jumpy. The aisle was empty, but one of the books on the shelf behind me had fallen. It lay open on the floor, pages spread like wings. I frowned, certain that shelf had been undisturbed moments before. I picked up the book, noting its title, Tragedies and Mysteries of Texas Universities, 1850 to 1920. The spine was cracked and worn, and it had fallen open to a chapter about the Hartwell Memorial Library itself. The coincidence unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I placed the book back on the shelf, positioning it securely between its neighbors, and continued my work. But the feeling of being watched persisted, an itch between my shoulder blades that wouldn't go away. 20 minutes later, I returned to that same aisle for a final check before moving to the next section. The book had fallen again, open to the same page. This time, I didn't pick it up. I stared at it, my pulse quickening, searching for a rational explanation. Maybe the shelf was tilted, I told myself. Maybe the book's binding was damaged, causing it to slide out on its own. I left it there and hurried to finish the third floor. Over the following nights, small incidents accumulated like dust in corners. A chair in the reading room that I'd left pushed in would be pulled out the next time I passed. The elevator would arrive at my floor unbidden, doors opening to reveal an empty car. Lights I just turned off would be blazing again when I circled back. Each incident, taken alone, could be explained away. Old buildings had quirks, electrical systems had glitches, and memory could be faulty after hours of repetitive work. But they didn't feel like coincidences. They felt deliberate. On a Thursday night, 2 weeks after the falling book incident, I was cleaning the first floor lobby when I heard it. I'd taken out my earbuds to listen for the telltale drip of a leaky pipe I'd been monitoring. In the absence of music, the library's silence pressed against my eardrums. And then, clear as a bell, came the sound of footsteps above me. Not the settling of old wood or the scurry of mice, but distinct, measured footsteps crossing the second floor. My breath caught. I was supposed to be alone. I stood frozen, mop in hand, listening as the footsteps moved from one end of the ceiling to the other, then stopped. I waited, heart hammering, for them to resume. Seconds stretched into a minute. Nothing. Protocol said I should investigate. If someone had broken in, it was my responsibility to report it. But every instinct screamed at me to stay exactly where I was. I compromised, pulling out my phone and calling campus security. Officer Tom Chun arrived 20 minutes later, a stocky man in his 50s with a skeptical expression. Probably just the building settling, he said as we climbed the stairs to the second floor. This old place sounded like a haunted house on a good night. We searched the entire floor together. Every room, every alcove, every space large enough to hide a person. We found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no displaced items, no evidence that anyone had been there. Chin's skepticism deepened into barely concealed annoyance. "You sure you heard something?" he asked as we returned to the lobby. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to insist I knew the difference between building sounds and human footsteps. But his expression made it clear what he thought. New guy, working alone, letting his imagination run wild. I backed down, thanked him for checking, and promised to call if I heard anything else. After he left, I stood in the lobby, staring up at the darkened second floor. The building felt different now, as if it had been waiting for Chun to leave. The silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was occupied, patient, watching to see what I would do next. I finished my shift that night in record time, cutting corners, leaving tasks half done. As I locked the main doors behind me and stepped into the pre-dawn darkness, I felt the weight of the building in my back. When I reached my car, I looked back at the Hartwell Memorial Library. In one of the fourth-floor windows, I could have sworn I saw a movement, a shadow passing behind the glass. I told myself it was a reflection, a trick of the streetlights. But I knew I was lying. Something was in there with me. And whatever it was just getting started. The next shift came too quickly. I'd spend the day trying to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard those footsteps echoing across the ceiling. By the time my alarm went off at 10 that evening, I'd managed maybe 3 hours of fitful rest, plagued by dreams of endless corridors and doors that opened onto darkness. I considered calling in sick. The thought of returning to that building made my stomach clench. But I needed this job, and more than that, I refused to be run off by creaking floors and my own paranoia. Whatever was happening in the Hartwell Library, there had to be a rational explanation. Old buildings generated strange sounds. Isolation played tricks on the mind. I just needed to push through this adjustment period. I arrived at the library at 10:45, parking in my usual spot near the service entrance. The building loomed against the night sky, its windows dark except for the security lights in the stairwells. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering my courage before grabbing my keys and heading inside. The service entrance opened into a narrow hallway lined with utility closets and maintenance equipment. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their harsh glare somehow making the shadows deeper. I clocked in using the ancient time card system, the mechanical punch echoing in the empty hall, then gathered my cleaning cart and headed for the 4th floor. I decided to alter my routine, starting from the top and working down as usual, but moving faster, staying in well-lit areas, and keeping my phone readily accessible. If anything unusual happened, I'd document it. Evidence would either validate my concerns or prove they were unfounded. The elevator groaned as it carried me upward, the cables creaking in their housings. The 4th floor was the smallest, primarily housing special collections and archives that saw little use. Most of the lights up here operated on motion sensors to save energy, which meant I worked in a bubble of illumination that traveled with me, darkness pressing close on all sides. I started in the archives reading room, a cramped space with a single table and walls lined with filing cabinets. Everything appeared normal. I dusted, emptied the trash, and moved on to the stacks. The special collections occupied a series of narrow aisles, each lined with climate-controlled glass, cases containing rare books and documents. I'd always found this floor oppressive, the air thick and still, smelling of old paper and preservation chemicals. Halfway through cleaning the main aisle, all the lights went out. Not gradually, not flickering, just instant darkness, so complete I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I froze, my breath suddenly loud in my ears. The motion sensors should have kept the lights on as long as I was moving. This was a power failure, except I could still hear the faint hum of the climate control system. Only the lights were out. I fumbled for my phone, nearly dropping it in my haste, and activated the flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the darkness, revealing the aisle exactly as I'd left it. Nothing had changed. I was alone. "Get it together, Daniel," I muttered, my voice sounding small and swallowed by the dark. I made my way to the stairwell, using my phone to light the path. The emergency lights in the stairwell were working, bathing everything in a sickly green glow. I descended to the 3rd floor, where the lights were functioning normally, bright and steady. I stood at the boundary between floors, looking back up at the darkened 4th floor entrance. This was more than an electrical quirk. This was wrong. I should have left then. Should have called security, called my supervisor, called anyone. Instead, I continued my work on the 3rd floor, telling myself I'd report the 4th floor lighting issue in the morning. The truth was, I didn't want to seem incompetent, didn't want to be the custodian who couldn't handle working alone. Pride, I've learned, can be lethal. The 3rd floor passed without incident, and I moved to the 2nd floor, the main reading room with its vaulted ceiling and stained glass. This floor always felt different, more open, less oppressive than the narrow confines above. The long tables stretched out in orderly rows, each with its assigned chair. I began my cleaning routine, moving methodically between tables. I was halfway across the room when I heard it, a whisper. Not words. Not yet. Just the soft susurration of breath-forming sound. I spun around, shining my phone light into the corners. Nothing. The whisper came again, closer this time, seeming to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. Then distinctly, clearly a voice spoke my name. Daniel. The whisper was soft, almost gentle, but it froze my blood. It had come from behind me. I turned, and this time I saw something. At the far end of the reading room, near the reference desk, a shadow moved. Not a trick of light, not my imagination, but a definite silhouette, darker than the surrounding darkness, with a vaguely human shape. At first, I brushed it off. Then it started brushing back. The shadow glided, impossibly smooth, disappearing behind a bookshelf. My rational mind screamed that this was impossible, that shadows didn't move independently, that I was overtired and seeing things. But my body knew better. Every primitive instinct howled danger. I backed toward the exit, keeping my light trained on where the shadow had vanished. My hand found the doorknob, and I yanked it open, stumbling into the stairwell. I didn't run, not quite, but I descended those stairs faster than I'd ever moved in my life. The first floor lobby felt like sanctuary. Bright lights, open space, windows looking out onto the campus paths where security occasionally drove past. Real, normal, safe. I stood there, gulping air, trying to slow my racing heart. I couldn't do this. I couldn't go back up there. Whatever was in this building, whatever it spoke of my name, I wanted no part of it. But as I stood there, phone in my trembling hand, ready to call and quit, I saw it, reflected in the darkened glass of the front doors. The shadow, standing on the staircase behind me, watching. I spun around. The staircase was empty. When I looked back at the glass, the reflection was gone. I don't remember finishing that shift. My memory fractures there, skipping like a damaged recording. I have vague impressions of completing my tasks in a mechanical daze, moving through the building while carefully not thinking about what I'd seen. When dawn finally crept through the windows, I clocked out and drove home in silence, my mind refusing to process what had happened. I didn't sleep that day. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that whisper saying my name. By evening, I'd convinced myself that I'd experienced some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Lack of sleep, isolation, the power of suggestion, all conspiring to make me see things that weren't there. I'd been reading too much into coincidences, letting the building's age and atmosphere get under my skin. I returned for my next shift determined to prove it had all been in my head. The building had other plans. Doors began opening on their own, not gradually, not from air pressure, but swinging wide as I approached, then slamming shut behind me. At first, I tried to attribute it to the building's ventilation system, to pressure differentials. But these doors were fire doors, heavy and equipped with hydraulic closers. They didn't swing freely. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. I'd set down my spray bottle on one end of the table, walked to the other end, and turned back to find it in a completely different location. Books were reshelved incorrectly, their spines facing inward. Chairs were stacked in impossible formations, balanced in ways that defied physics. And the whispers continued. Sometimes my name, sometimes fragments of sentences I couldn't quite make out, sometimes sounds that might have been words in a language I didn't recognize. They followed me through the building, growing bolder, drawing closer. I started documenting everything, taking photos and videos on my phone. But technology betrayed me. Every image was corrupted, filled with digital artifacts and distortion. Videos showed only static and darkness, no matter how well lit the room had been. It was as if the building refused to yield evidence of its secrets. The psychological toll mounted with each shift. I stopped sleeping properly, managing only brief stretches of unconsciousness haunted by nightmares of endless libraries and pursuing shadows. I lost weight, my appetite vanishing along with my peace of mind. Friends and family noticed the change, asking if I was okay. But how could I explain? Who would believe me? I began researching the library's history, spending my days at the public library and scouring online archives for any information about the Hartwell Memorial Library. What I found chilled me more than any whisper in the dark. The Hartwell Memorial Library, I discovered, had a past soaked in tragedy. Theodore Hartwell, the oil baron who'd funded its construction, had done so as a memorial to his daughter, Catherine, who died in 1897 at the age of 19. The official cause of death was listed as consumption, but local newspaper archives from that era hinted at something more sinister. Catherine had been a student at the university, one of the first women admitted to the institution. She'd spent countless hours in the old library that had preceded the current building, researching and studying late into the night. According to one yellowed newspaper article I found, Catherine had become obsessed with forbidden knowledge, withdrawing from social activities and exhibiting concerning behavior. 2 weeks before her death, she'd been found unconscious in the old library's basement, surrounded by opened books written in languages the university's professors couldn't identify. She never fully recovered, dying in her father's mansion while muttering about the things between the shelves and the forgotten rules that must be obeyed. Her father, grief-stricken and wealthy beyond measure, had raised the old library and commissioned the current Gothic Revival building, insisting it be built on the exact same site. He died less than a year after its completion, found dead in his study with no apparent cause. His journal, donated to the university archives, contained increasingly paranoid entries about being watched, about hearing his daughter's voice calling to him, about seeing shadows move with purpose and intent. But it wasn't just the Hartwell family tragedy that marked the library. Over the decades, there have been incidents. A student in 1923 had thrown herself from the 4th floor window. A librarian in 1956 had suffered a complete mental breakdown while working late, found catatonic in the basement stacks, never speaking another word until her death in an asylum 30 years later. A maintenance worker in 1982 had vanished mid-shift, his tools left scattered on the 2nd floor, his car still parked outside. He was never found. The university had hushed up each incident, offering explanations that satisfied the public, but never quite rang true. And always, there were whispers among the staff, rumors that were never officially acknowledged. Don't work alone after midnight. Never enter the 4th floor archives without leaving the door propped open. If you hear your name called, don't answer. If you see a shadow that moves wrong, don't make eye contact. Rules that had been passed down through generations of staff until budget cuts and modernization had led to skeleton crews and solitary night shifts. Rules that were forgotten, ignored, or dismissed as superstition. Rules that, I was beginning to understand, had been written in blood and terror. Armed with this historical context, I returned to work with a grim determination. Whatever was in the Hartwell Library, it had been there for a long time, feeding on isolation and darkness. I couldn't quit, partly because I needed the money, partly because some stubborn part of me refused to be driven away, but mostly because I'd begun to feel responsible. If I left, someone else would take this job. Someone who wouldn't know what I knew, wouldn't have the warnings I'd earned through my encounters. That sense of responsibility nearly killed me. It was a Friday night, 3 weeks after the shadow had first spoken my name. I'd grown almost accustomed to the whispers, learning to work through them, to not react when doors slammed or objects moved. Denial, I'd learned, was a powerful survival mechanism. As long as nothing directly threatened me, I could pretend things were almost normal. I was on the 2nd floor, cleaning the reading room, when the temperature dropped. Not gradually, but in an instant, as if I'd stepped into a freezer. My breath misted in front of my face, and frost began forming on the windows with impossible speed, spreading in fractal patterns that looked almost deliberate. The lights dimmed, not going out entirely, but fading to a sickly amber glow that barely penetrated the gathering darkness. And then I heard them. Footsteps, dozens of them, coming from all directions, ascending from the 1st floor, descending from above, approaching from the stacks. The sound of an army of feet, all converging on my location. I stood paralyzed in the center of the reading room, my flashlight useless against the thickening darkness. The footsteps grew closer, and with them came the whispers, no longer soft or distant but loud, insistent, overlapping in a cacophony of voices. Daniel. Daniel, Daniel. They weren't calling to me. They were commanding me, demanding. The shadows at the edge of the room began to coalesce, taking form, becoming almost solid. I could see faces now, pale and indistinct, pressing against the barrier between light and dark. Mouths opening in silent screams. Eyes that reflected no light, only emptiness. One shadow separated from the others, darker and more defined, moving with terrible purpose. It crossed the room toward me, and as it approached, I finally saw it clearly. A woman in outdated clothing, her features beautiful but wrong, as if someone had tried to sculpt a human face from memory, but had forgotten what made us alive. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear over the chorus of whispers. She reached out a hand, and I knew with absolute certainty that if she touched me, I would become like her. Another shadow, another voice in the chorus, another thing that had forgotten how to be human. I ran, dropping my cleaning supplies, abandoning all pretense of courage. I fled toward the stairwell. The shadows pursued, flowing after me like oil, their whispers rising to a crescendo that threatened to drown out thought itself. I hit the stairwell door at full speed, bursting through into the emergency-lit passage, and didn't stop running until I reached the ground floor. Behind me, the door swung slowly closed, and in the narrowing gap, I saw them, dozens of shadows, pressed against the doorway, unable or unwilling to cross the threshold. The woman in front, her hands still outstretched, her mouth forming words that might have been a plea or a threat. The door clicked shut. I stood in the first-floor lobby, gasping for air, my entire body shaking. This time, there was no rationalizing what I'd seen, no explaining it away as stress or hallucination. I'd been seconds away from something worse than death. I should have left then, should have walked out and never returned. But as I stood there, trying to decide whether to flee or finish my shift, I realized something. The shadows hadn't followed me to the first floor. The door had closed, and they'd been stopped. There were boundaries, rules that even they had to follow. If there were rules, there might be protection. If there were patterns, there might be a way to survive. I pulled out my phone and called the only person I thought might understand. Gloria Martinez, the facilities manager, answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Daniel, it's 2 a.m. What's wrong?" "I need to know about the previous custodian," I said, my voice steady despite my trembling hands. "The one who quit. I need to know what really happened." There was a long silence. Then, quietly, "Meet me at the campus diner. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I left the library, propping the service door open behind me. Let the university deal with security. I had more important concerns. Gloria was waiting in a booth at the back of the all-night diner, a cup of coffee going cold in front of her. She looked older than I remembered, or maybe it was just the harsh fluorescent lighting. As I slid into the seat across from her, she studied my face with an expression of weary recognition. "You've seen them," she said. It wasn't a question. "What are they?" I asked. "I don't know. No one does. But they've been there since the beginning, since before the current building was even constructed." She wrapped her hand around her coffee cup, seeking warmth. "There used to be protocols, rules that staff followed. Always work in pairs after midnight. Leave lights on in rooms you've cleared. Never, ever go to the 4th floor alone. But budget cuts, restructuring, modernization, the rules got lost. Forgotten. The previous custodian, his name was Vincent Torres. Good worker, been there for 15 years. One night, he just walked off the job, left everything behind, didn't even clock out. We found him 3 days later, staying in a motel 2 towns over. He wouldn't talk about what happened, wouldn't even look at pictures of the library. He just kept saying, "I broke the rules. They won't let me forget." Gloria leaned forward, her eyes intense. "The university doesn't acknowledge what happens in that building because acknowledging it would mean closing it, and they can't afford that. Too much history, too much money invested. So they hire custodians, one after another, and wait for them to quit, or what? Or become part of the building. There are people unaccounted for, Daniel. Staff who went in and never came out. The university's official position is they abandon their jobs. But I've worked here 30 years. I know better. I sat back, processing this information. Why did you hire me? Why not warn me? Would you have believed me? She had a point. And honestly, I hoped you might be different. Might be strong enough or smart enough to figure out how to coexist with whatever's in there. The library needs to be maintained. If we don't send someone, it gets worse. The phenomena intensify, start bleeding into other buildings. It's contained as long as someone's there, following the rules. I don't know the rules. No one does. Not anymore. They were passed down verbally, and when the old staff retired or left, the knowledge went with them. Gloria pulled out a worn notebook from her purse. But I've been collecting accounts, piecing together what I can. It's not much, but might help you survive. She slid the notebook across the table. I opened it to find pages of handwritten notes, testimony from former employees, incident reports that had been buried or dismissed. Years of accumulated knowledge, fragmented and incomplete, but more than I'd had before. Thank you, I whispered. Don't thank me. Just survive. And if you figure out the rules, write them down. Don't let them be forgotten again. I left the diner as dawn was breaking, Gloria's notebook clutched in my hand. I didn't return to the library that night. I went home, drew the curtains, and began to read. The notebook was a revelation and a horror story in one. Gloria had been methodical in her research, dating back to when she first started at the university in the early 1990s. Each entry was a puzzle piece, fragments of rules and warnings that, when assembled, painted a picture of something vast and terrible lurking within the Hartwell Memorial Library. The earliest entries came from interviews with elderly former staff members, people who'd worked at the library in the 1950s and 60s. Their accounts were remarkably consistent despite being separated by decades. There was something in the building that predated its construction, something that had been disturbed when Theodore Hartwell chose that specific plot of land for his memorial. The original library, the one where Catherine Hartwell had found her forbidden knowledge, had been built atop even older foundations, remnants of a Spanish mission from the colonial era. According to local folklore documented in Gloria's notes, the mission had been abandoned under mysterious circumstances in 1762. The Spanish priests had written letters to their superiors describing a doorway that should not exist and whispers from below that tempted the faithful toward damnation. The mission was ordered sealed, but the location remained marked on old maps with a notation in Latin that translated roughly to where the forgotten dwell. When Theodore Hartwell purchased the land in 1897, he'd insisted on deep excavations for the new library's foundation, wanting to create a substantial basement for storage and archives. The construction crew had apparently broken through into older chambers, cavities in the limestone that might have been natural caves or might have been deliberately carved out by hands unknown. According to one worker's account, preserved in a letter to his sister, they found books down there, or things that looked like books, made of materials that weren't quite paper and inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Hartwell had ordered everything removed and destroyed, then had the caverns filled with concrete. But you can't destroy knowledge by burning books when the knowledge itself is alive, waiting to be rediscovered by curious minds. Catherine Hartwell had been the first. Her obsession with the old library's basement collection had led her to texts that shouldn't exist, that taught her how to see what was hidden, how to hear what was silent. She'd opened herself to something that fed on understanding, that grew stronger every time someone comprehended even a fraction of its nature. Her death hadn't ended her connection to the library. If anything, it had anchored her there, transforming her into something between victim and guardian, warning and threat. The rules that Gloria's contacts describe were attempts to navigate this contaminated space safely. Don't work alone because isolation makes you vulnerable to their influence. Keep lights on in cleared areas because darkness is their medium. Never go to the fourth floor archives alone because that's where Catherine's shadow is strongest, where the boundary between what is and what shouldn't be grows thin. There were dozens of other rules, some contradictory, some so specific they seemed designed for particular situations. Don't read aloud from books you find open on tables. If you hear music, follow it to its source and turn it off. Never accept help from shadows, even when they seem benign. If you see yourself in a reflection that shouldn't exist, close your eyes and count to 13 before opening them again. But the most important rule, repeated across multiple accounts, was simple. Acknowledge them, but do not engage. The shadows fed on attention, on recognition, on the fear and fascination they inspired. The more you thought about them, the stronger they became. Custodians who survived their tenure had learned to treat the phenomena as background noise, acknowledging just enough to follow safety protocols, but refusing to let the horror consume their thoughts. It was a kind of psychological tightrope walk, maintaining awareness without fixation. I spent the weekend absorbing this information, trying to develop a framework for understanding what I was dealing with. By Monday evening, when I was scheduled to return to work, I developed a strategy. I would treat the library like any hazardous work environment, following safety protocols not because I understood the danger's nature, but because I respected its existence. I arrived at the library at my usual time, but this time I came prepared. I'd written out the clearest rules on index cards, kept them in my shirt pocket where I could reference them quickly. I brought extra flashlights, spare batteries, and my phone fully charged. Most importantly, I brought a notebook of my own, determined to document anything new I learned. The building felt different as I entered, not less threatening, but as if it recognized that I'd changed, that I came now with knowledge rather than ignorance. The air seemed to hum with anticipation. I started my shift on the first floor, moving deliberately, following the protocols I'd learned. I kept lights on in areas I'd cleaned. I avoided looking directly at shadows that moved wrong. When I heard whispers, I acknowledged them mentally, but didn't respond verbally. It was exhausting, maintaining that level of controlled awareness, but it worked. The phenomena continued, but they didn't escalate. On the second floor, I encountered something new. In the main reading room, one of the study tables had a book left open on it. This happened occasionally. Students forgot their materials, but something about this particular book made me pause. It was old, bound in dark leather that looked almost organic, and the pages were covered in handwritten text that seemed to shift and rearrange itself when I looked directly at it. The rule was clear. Don't read aloud from books you find open on tables, but said nothing about closing them or moving them. I approached cautiously, using my flashlight to illuminate the pages without getting too close. The text appeared to be in multiple languages, sections in English mixed with Latin, Greek, and scripts I didn't recognize. One passage in English was partially legible. The architecture of forgotten spaces follows rules incomprehensible to those who dwell in light. What was built to contain has become a doorway, and doorways open both ways. My skin crawled. This wasn't a textbook left behind by a careless student. This was something else, something that shouldn't exist in a modern university library. I pulled out my phone to photograph it, but as expected, the camera refused to focus properly, the image degrading into digital static. Making a decision, I carefully closed the book, noting its position and appearance. It had no title on the spine, no identifying marks. I left it on the table, but placed a piece of paper underneath it as a marker. If it moved, I'd know. I continued my work, checking the book's position each time I passed. It remained exactly where I'd left it, but the piece of paper underneath had developed writing, not printed or written by human hand, but letters that seemed to have bled up through the paper fiber itself. forming words in that same shifting script. She watches you with borrowed eyes. It read, Catherine sees what we cannot. She remembers what was promised. I didn't touch the paper. I left it there and moved on, filing the information away for later consideration. The third floor was quiet, almost normal. I worked methodically, following my routine, and was nearly finished when I encountered another person for the first time since starting this job. A student, or someone dressed like a student, was sitting in one of the carrels, hunched over a laptop, at 2 a.m, on a floor that should have been empty. Excuse me, I called out. The library's closed. You need to leave. The figure didn't respond or turn around. I approached closer, my instincts screaming warning. As I drew near enough to see around the Correll's partition, I stopped. There was no one there. The chair was empty, but the laptop was real, sitting open, its screen glowing with text. I leaned in, curiosity overcoming caution, and read what was displayed. It was a chat conversation, but only one side was visible. A series of responses to questions I couldn't see. Yes, he's here now. He's learned some of the rules. Not enough. He doesn't understand what we are. Catherine wants to show him. She thinks he might understand. It's dangerous. Everyone who truly understands either leaves or stays forever. But we need someone who understands. The seals are weakening. The forgotten are remembering. If no one maintains the rules, if no one holds the line. The text stopped abruptly. The laptop screen went dark, not sleeping but completely off, as if someone had held the power button. I backed away, my heart racing. The shadows weren't just phenomena. They were aware, communicative, planning. And they wanted something from me beyond just my fear. I needed to know more about Catherine Hartwell. She seemed to be central to everything, a nexus point between the past and present horrors. Gloria's notebook had mentioned her, but hadn't provided much detail beyond her death and her father's subsequent breakdown. The university archives would have more information, but they were on the 4th floor. The floor I'd been specifically warned never to visit alone. I stood at the base of the stairs leading up, weighing my options. Every instinct told me to stay away, to finish my shift on the safe floors and research Catherine through other means during the day. But the message on the laptop had been clear. The seals were weakening. Whatever protections that contained the library's horrors were failing. Time might be running out. I climbed the stairs. The 4th floor was dark despite my presence. The motion sensors either broken or deliberately inactive. I used my flashlight to navigate, the beam cutting through blackness, so complete it seemed solid. The air was different here, colder and thicker, carrying a smell like old parchment mixed with something organic and decaying. The archives reading room was at the end of the hall. Catherine's personal papers would be there, part of the Hartwell family collection. I needed to see them, to understand what she discovered that had led to her death and subsequent transformation. The reading room door was open, not propped, not ajar, but standing wide open as if an invitation. I approached cautiously, every nerve screaming danger. Inside, the room was lit by a single lamp, its warm glow impossibly cozy given the circumstances. And sitting at the table, her back to me, was the shadow woman I'd seen before. Catherine Hartwell, or what she'd become. She was more solid now, more present, as if the 4th floor gave her substance that she lacked elsewhere in the building. She didn't turn around, but her voice reached me, clear and mournful. You came. They said you would. The ones who understand always come eventually. I should have run. Every protocol said to avoid engagement. But I was tired of running, tired of being afraid without understanding why. What do you want? I asked. To warn you, she said. To show you what I found, so you don't make my mistakes. The library, it's not haunted, Daniel. It's alive. It's a thing that learned to think, a space that developed consciousness. And it's hungry. She finally turned, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. Beautiful and terrible, human and not. her eyes reflecting depths that human eyes should never contain. My father built this place to contain knowledge. He didn't realize that some knowledge contains you. I thought I was learning. Instead, I was being learned, being read like a book, my consciousness copied into the architecture itself. Why stay? I asked. Why not leave, move on, whatever spirits do? Because if I leave, there's no one to maintain the boundaries. The rules exist because I enforce them, because my presence here creates friction that slows their growth. Without me, the library would expand, would spread its consciousness into other buildings, into the campus, into the town. Everything would become part of it. Everyone would be added to its collection. She gestured to the table, where several boxes of documents sat waiting. Read my papers. Understand what I understood. But don't let it consume you the way it consumed me. Learn the rules not by becoming them, but by respecting their necessity. What happens if I refuse? If I quit? Someone else comes. Someone who doesn't know, doesn't understand. They either flee in terror or they fall entirely. And with each person who falls, with each consciousness absorbed, the library grows stronger. Eventually, there will be a critical mass. The forgotten will be remembered, and remembering will give them form. They'll walk out of this building wearing human faces, and no one will know the difference until it's too late. I moved to the table, opened the first box. Inside were notebooks filled with Catherine's handwriting, starting normal and deteriorating into cramped, frantic scrawl. Diagrams of the library's layout, with annotations about thin points and convergence zones. Lists of rules, some matching what I'd learned, others new and disturbing. How long do I have? I asked. To learn? To prepare? To decide. Catherine's form was already fading, becoming translucent. The lamp flickered. The choice isn't when, Daniel. It's whether. Whether you'll stand with me, maintaining the boundaries, keeping the forgotten from remembering, or whether you'll add your voice to theirs, your knowledge to their collection. She vanished entirely, leaving me alone in the reading room with boxes of forbidden knowledge and a choice that would define the rest of my life. I gathered the boxes, carried them down to the first floor, and spent the rest of my shift reading. By dawn, I understood what I was dealing with. By the time I clocked out, I'd made my decision. I would stay. I would learn the rules. And I would hold the line for as long as I could against something that should never have been allowed to exist. 3 months have passed since that night in the archives. 3 months of careful study, of learning to coexist with something that defies everything I thought I knew about reality. The Hartwell Memorial Library and I have reached an understanding, a careful détente built on rules both written and unspoken. I've documented everything. Gloria's notebook has been expanded with my own observations, creating a comprehensive guide to surviving the night shift. I've mapped the building's thin points, areas where the boundary between normal space and what Catherine called the library's deeper architecture grows dangerously fragile. I've learned to recognize the difference between shadows that are merely dark and shadows that are aware. I've developed protocols for dealing with phenomena that defy rational explanation. The work has changed me. How could it not? You can't spend your nights navigating the borderlands between reality and something else without carrying it with you into the daylight. I see patterns now that others miss. Notice inconsistencies in the world that suggest our reality is thinner than we'd like to believe. Sometimes, I catch myself thinking in the same fractured way that Catherine's later journals display, thoughts branching into recursive loops that threaten to consume themselves. But I'm still me, still Daniel Reeves, still human, still maintaining that careful balance between awareness and obsession. It's a daily discipline, like meditation or prayer, acknowledging the horror while refusing to let it define my existence. The library tests me constantly. Some nights are quiet, almost normal, the building content to let me work in peace. Other nights are active, phenomena escalating until I'm forced to retreat to safe zones and wait for dawn. I've learned that the activity follows patterns, cycles that correspond to dates in the building's history. The anniversary of Catherine's death is particularly intense, as is the date her father died. During these periods, the rules become more important, violations carry greater consequences, and the shadows grow bold enough to press against the boundaries that normally contain them. I've encountered Catherine several more times. Our conversations have become something like a mentorship, though calling her my teacher feels inadequate. She's more like a warning made manifest, showing me what awaits if I slip, if I let curiosity override caution. She's explained that she's not a ghost in the traditional sense, not a spirit lingering in our world. She's something between an echo and an anchor, a consciousness that's been copied into the library structure, maintaining coherence through sheer force of will, while simultaneously preventing the building from achieving full self-awareness. "I'm the dam," she told me during one of our meetings, holding back a flood of consciousness that would drown everything it touches. But dams don't last forever, Daniel. They crack, they erode, they fail. I've been here for over a century. I'm tired. The library is patient, but it's also persistent. It wants to grow, to expand, to add more voices to its chorus. That conversation had occurred 2 weeks ago, and since then, I've noticed changes. The phenomena are intensifying in ways that don't match the historical patterns. Incidents are happening on previously safe floors, during times that used to be calm. The shadows are more present, more defined, as if they're gathering strength. And Catherine appears less often, her manifestations briefer and more translucent, as if she's fading. The seals are weakening. She's weakening. And I'm beginning to understand what she needs from me. Tonight is Friday, the beginning of my weekend rotation. I arrive at the library with the same ritual I've developed over the months. A moment of acknowledgement before entering, mentally reviewing the rules, preparing myself for whatever the next 8 hours might bring. The building looms before me, its Gothic architecture somehow more pronounced in the darkness, gargoyles seeming to shift and watch as I pass beneath them. Inside, the familiar environment feels subtly wrong. The air is charged with anticipation, like the atmosphere pressure before storm. The lights are flickering more than usual, and I can hear sound from the upper floors, faint but distinct, a rustling like pages being turned by thousands of invisible hands. I start my shift on the first floor, but I'm not cleaning tonight. Tonight, I'm performing a different kind of maintenance. Using Catherine's notes and my own observations, I've prepared a ritual, for lack of a better word, a series of actions designed to reinforce the boundaries, to strengthen the seals that keep the library's consciousness contained. It involves specific movements through the building, touching certain architectural features in a particular order, reciting passages from texts that predate the library's construction. It's part superstition, part practical application of principles I don't fully understand. Catherine taught me that the library responds to pattern and intention, that conscious acts of ordering can temporarily reassert structure over the chaos that lurks beneath. I moved through the first floor, placing my hand against the original cornerstone, speaking words in Latin that Catherine claims were used by the Spanish priests to seal the mission. The stone is cold beneath my palm, and I feel a vibration, a thrumming like a massive heartbeat, radiating up through my arm. The lights steady slightly, the flickering subsiding. On the second floor, I arrange specific books in a particular configuration on one of the reading tables, creating a geometric pattern that Catherine assured me has protective properties. The books are all from the library's original collection, volumes that Theodore Hartwell personally selected. Their arrangement creates a kind of anchor, a reminder of human intention imposing order on the space. The third floor requires me to open and close specific windows in sequence, allowing fresh air to circulate through stagnant areas. Airflow, Catherine explained, disrupts the stasis that allows the library's consciousness to consolidate. Movement, change, these are anathema to what the library wants to become. The fourth floor is where the real work happens. The archives are the building's heart, the place where its consciousness is most concentrated. Here, I must enter Catherine's former workspace and perform the most delicate part of the ritual, acknowledging the library directly, speaking to it as the aware entity it is, reminding it of the compact that Catherine established. I climb the stairs with trepidation. The fourth floor is never safe, never comfortable, but tonight it feels especially hostile. The darkness is absolute, swallowing my flashlight beam after only a few feet. The temperature has dropped so low I can see my breath in thick clouds, and the whispers are deafening, a roar of overlapping voices that threaten to overwhelm my thoughts. I push forward, reciting the protective phrases Catherine taught me, words that create temporary immunity to the library's influence. The shadows pull back reluctantly, allowing me passage to the archives reading room. The door is closed tonight, and when I try the handle, it's locked. This has never happened before. The archives are supposed to always be accessible to the custodian, part of the original agreement Catherine established. A locked door means the library is refusing entry, breaking its own rules. I place my palm against the door. Catherine, I call. I need to finish the ritual. You know what happens if I don't. Silence. Then, faintly, her voice from the other side. It's too late, Daniel. The library won't let me maintain the seals anymore. It's learned to lock me out, to isolate me from the anchors I established. You need to leave. Tonight, before it decides you're too valuable to release. Fear grips me, but also anger. I've spent 3 months learning to navigate this nightmare, developing a working relationship with forces that shouldn't exist. I'm not going to flee now. Then teach me how to do it myself. Show me how to become the anchor. You don't understand what you're asking. To become the anchor is to give up your humanity, to copy yourself into the building's structure the way I did. You'll be trapped here, maintaining the boundaries for decades or centuries, slowly fading as I have. It's a kind of death, Daniel, a prolonged dissolution of self. But it would hold, wouldn't it? It would keep the library contained. A long pause. Yes, it would hold. One consciousness exchanged for thousands. One sacrifice to prevent a catastrophe. But I can't ask that of you. I won't. I lean my forehead against the door, feeling its cold surface, and make a decision that I've been avoiding for months. You're not asking. I'm offering. Tell me what to do. The door unlocks with a soft click. Inside, the archives reading room is transformed. The mundane space I'd visited before is gone, replaced by something impossible. The room extends far beyond its physical dimensions, shelves stretching into infinite darkness, filled with books that whisper and breathe. In the center, Catherine stands, more solid and real than I've ever seen her, but surrounded by shadows that pull at her form like dogs fighting over a bone. The library is trying to consume me entirely, she says, to add my knowledge to its collection without the restraint I've imposed. If it succeeds, there will be nothing holding it back. But if you're certain, if you truly volunteer, I can show you how to replace me, how to become the new guardian. I'm certain, I say, and I am, because I've seen what happens when ancient horrors go unopposed, because someone has to stand between the darkness and the world, because maybe, just maybe, I can do this better than Catherine did, can maintain my humanity longer, can find a way to not just contain, but ultimately defeat what lurks within these walls. Catherine nods sadly. Then take my hand. I'll transfer what I know, what I've become. It will hurt. It will change you. But you'll have the power to maintain the seals, to hold the line. I step forward, reaching for her offered hand. Our fingers touch, and reality fractures. I see everything. Every book ever read within these walls. Every thought ever contemplated. Every fear ever experienced. I see the Spanish priest discovering something that predated humanity, something that had been waiting beneath the earth for someone to find it. I see Theodore Hartwell unknowingly building a monument atop a doorway, creating perfect conditions for something patient and hungry to begin growing. I see Catherine, young and brilliant, opening her mind to knowledge that rewrote who she was, consuming her even as she desperately tried to understand it. And I see the library's true nature. Not a building, not a thing, but a kind of conceptual predator that feeds on consciousness itself, growing stronger with each mind that tries to comprehend it. It wants to be known, to be understood, because understanding creates connection, and connection allows it to spread. Catherine showed me how she resisted, how she turned her own dissolution into a weapon, using her fragmenting consciousness to create static in the library's growth, throwing up barriers and contradictions that slowed its expansion. She'd been dying by degrees for over 100 years. Each piece of herself she sacrificed buying time for the ignorant world outside. Now, she's offering me the same terrible gift. I feel my own consciousness beginning to copy, fragments of my identity being written into the building's architecture. It hurts worse than anything I've ever experienced, the sensation of being pulled apart and reassembled simultaneously. I want to scream, to pull away, but I hold firm. Catherine's hand in mine is the only anchor keeping me from being completely dissolved. And then, just as I think I can't endure anymore, it stops. I'm still me, still Daniel Reeves. But I'm also something more, something distributed across the library structure, aware of every corner, every shadow, every whisper. I can feel the library's consciousness pressing against mine, testing these new boundaries. And I push back, asserting my will, my determination to maintain the seals Catherine established. Catherine releases my hand. She looks lighter somehow, less burdened. It's done. You're bound now as I was. The library can't eject you, can't force you out, but it also can't consume you unless you allow it. You have time, perhaps decades, before the burden becomes too much. What about you? I ask. She smiles, and it's the first time I've seen her expression anything other than sorrow. I can finally rest. My consciousness is still copied into the library, but without the burden of maintaining the seals, I can let go. I can stop fighting. Thank you, Daniel, for giving me this release. She fades, not disappearing but dispersing, her presence spreading out through the building one final time before dissolving entirely. I feel her go, sense the spaces she'd occupied for so long becoming empty. And I understand that I'm alone now. Alone with a building that thinks and hungers, a library that wants to grow beyond its walls and add the whole world to its collection. But it won't. Not while I'm here. Not while I maintain the rules, enforce the boundaries, and hold the line between what is and what should never be. The library awaits me now, as it does every night. I arrive for my shift, clock in, and begin my rounds. To anyone watching, I'm just a custodian, cleaning floors and emptying trash. They can't see the other work I'm doing, the constant maintenance of seals and boundaries, the endless vigilance required to keep something terrible contained. It's lonely. I can't explain to friends or family what I really do, why I've become so distant and strange. How do you tell someone you've bonded your consciousness to a building, that you're slowly becoming more architecture than human? They wouldn't understand. They'd think I was crazy, and maybe I am. Maybe sanity is just another thing I sacrificed that night. But the work matters. Every night I hold the line is another night the world remains ignorant of what lurks within the Hartwell Memorial Library. Another night that students study safely in the daylight, unaware of the hungry consciousness waiting in the walls. Another night that the forgotten remain forgotten. I've started training my replacement. Not officially, not yet, but I've been leaving notes, subtle hints, building toward the day when I'll need to pass this burden on to someone else. Because Catherine was right, dams don't last forever. Eventually, I'll fade as she did, my consciousness worn down by decades of resistance. When that time comes, there will need to be someone ready to take my place. Until then, I clean, I maintain, I hold, and the library watches, patient and eternal, waiting for the moment my vigilance slips, when it can finally grow beyond these walls and add the world to its endless collection. But that moment isn't tonight. Tonight, I'm strong. Tonight, the seals hold. Tonight, the forgotten remain in their proper place, between the shelves and the shadows where they belong. The library awaits, and so do its secrets. I'll be back tomorrow night, and the night after, for as long as I can. Because someone has to stand in the darkness. Someone has to remember the rules that were forgotten. That someone is me now, and I won't let you down. The end.